Hi, this is Len. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast. Today is Friday, May 21st, 2021, and I am in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My guest this week is A.G. Riddle, Jerry Riddle, who returns to the show for a look back and a look forward on this pandemic. And the most sobering aspect of our conversation, I think, is what might the next pandemic look like based on what we've seen so far in this year and last year. As always, good to talk with Jerry. Also in news, I'll be talking about Amazon Publishing, which has finally secured a way to make its books available to public libraries. And in the tech tip, I'll walk you through an app that is part of that agreement announced by the Digital Public Library of America, which Amazon Publishing is working with to get this accomplished. And I'll have some tips on Prime Day, which I guess is coming in June. We don't know exactly the date, but Amazon has said it will be sometime in June, and CNET has an article where they highlight the items that are most likely to be reduced with dramatic discounts on Prime Day, and they even take a guess as to what price range you'll see some of these devices selling for. So if you're in the market for some of Amazon's own gadgets, it would be wise to wait until whenever it is in June that Prime Day comes. More on that later. Let's get started. Well, it seems longer than 6 months ago. I know it was sometime last year when I remember talking with you about my irritation with Amazon, pretty rare for me, because Amazon Publishing was the only major publisher that did not make its books available for borrowing at public libraries. And I pressed a little bit on this and was basically told there was nobody that could talk to me about it. It's just, and they had announced 6 months ago that they were working with the Digital Public Library of America on something, but they didn't have anything to announce. Well, this week it was announced, and it wasn't announced by Amazon Publishing. It was announced by the DPLA, Digital Public Library of America. And it's an agreement under which all of the roughly 10,000 Amazon Publishing ebook titles and digital audiobooks are going to be available to libraries. And this is the first time since APUB was launched by Amazon in 2009 that will be the case. The lending will begin sometime this summer, and it's going to use something called the DPLA Exchange. That's the organization's not-for-profit library-centered platform. And Amazon's not the first publisher to be on this platform. In fact, there's 1,000 others that have been signed up. And it's a way to get books available to libraries. There's information that I'm going to be looking into between now and when I'll have a chance to talk with someone from the DPLA, which I'm setting up for probably in about 3 weeks in June sometime. So we'll get the full story. But I want to make sure I understand how this works and try it out. I also want to know what's the impact on Overdrive. Is this really a direct competitor to Overdrive? Is Overdrive complemented in some way? Overdrive is the main way that libraries have been getting books from the major publishers, so lots of moving parts here, but it's all out in the open at this point. There's a tool that you can download to iOS or Android, not to the Fire tablets or the Kobo or some of the other e-readers. It's called the SimplyE app, SimplyE, and then the letter E app. This is a free open source e-reader developed by the New York Public Library, and it's used by the DPLA to make books available. The announcement stressed that readers will not have to go through their Amazon accounts to access the Amazon Publishing titles via DPLA, and Amazon will receive no patron data. That's the same as the other publishers working with DPLA. It's going to be probably the end of the year before all of those titles are available, and the coverage of it in Publishers Weekly by Andrew Albanese, a guy I really respect his coverage on everything having to do with the publishing industry at that trade magazine. He writes, "The deal represents a major step forward for the digital library market. Not only is Amazon Publishing finally making its digital content available to libraries. The deal gives libraries a range of models through which it can license the content, offering libraries the kind of flexibility librarians have long asked for from the major publishers. The DPLA, in one of something I found on the website, it says, like our previous publisher arrangements, this agreement furthers our mission to expand equitable access to ebooks and audiobooks while protecting library patron privacy. This is the group that got its start with a fellow named Robert Darnton, who was librarian at Harvard, and he was on the show a couple of times. When was that? 7 years ago or so. And there was a really grand vision, starting with university libraries making their books available. And I think they were hoping Google was going to get involved, and then it didn't happen. It was blocked somehow. And I remember feeling like they had to retrench to a much more modest mission compared with the one that they started with. And it looks like in the intervening years, they've gradually built up the catalog of content. You can access 43.9 million images, text, videos, and sounds from across the U.S. at the DPLA site. And they've created this exchange, which makes it possible for libraries to make good terms to have books available. The Amazon deal is like, I think, maybe a couple of dozen other publisher deals, which give the libraries 4 different ways to specify the lending period, how many days, how many copies, and then there's no pricing announced at this point. That's probably going to be worked out in the future. I like this. I think that this was worth the time it took for Amazon to negotiate with DPLA. It's a good nonprofit partner, and I'll be very interested to see what the American Library Association has to say about this. I couldn't find anything so far. They've frequently been kind of critical of Amazon. They're definitely critical of Amazon Publishing for not making books available, but they'd also been in heated conversations with Macmillan, because Macmillan was trying to make the terms of lending in libraries much more unfavorable to the libraries. And if this is a really good deal, I expect the ALA to say, yeah, this is good and we support it. Or maybe they'll have some criticism of it. Michael Kozlowski wrote about it in his Good E-Reader blog, and he notes that the deal is not exclusive to DPLA, so others, he mentions Cloud Library, Hoopla, and Overdrive, will eventually have deals worked out too. So I guess I'm not sure how that works. I mean, Amazon Publishing would be making a deal with Overdrive similar to this one. Yeah, well, that would make sense. It's also going to be interesting to see what the big 5 publishers have to say about this. If this is, I feel like there's a chess game going on, as so much has happened in the past 12 years regarding book publishing in the era of the Kindle, and so the various players are going to be figuring out what stance they take on this. But at this point, it's a deal, it's done, and it'll start bearing fruit in the coming year. I want to thank Dan Campbell and Maurice Sotirio for sending me links to the stories on this, and I was able to reach out pretty quickly via Amazon Publishing to someone in the DPLA who will be in the show next month. Second news story, Prime Day. A CNET article on May 21st said the company has said it's going to be in June, but the exact date is not determined yet. CNET had a useful rundown of some of the most popular products with guesses as to what they might be selling for. For example, the Echo Dot 4th generation. That's the nice round Echo Dot. It has really, really good sound. We've got one here in the living room. It normally sells for $50. And the lowest price that it's been so far, I think maybe it was on Black Friday, was $29. So they're saying that instead of spending $50 for this most popular smart speaker that Amazon has, you probably could expect that price to fall close to $29, $30, something like that. And that would definitely be worth waiting for. Amazon Smart Plugs, likewise, they normally sell for $25, and the lowest they've ever been is $15. So that $15 price is what we might expect on Prime Day for the very handy, easy to set up Amazon Smart Plug. I've got one here that enables me to turn on the lights in my den. Echo Flex. That's a cool product. I put a couple of those at my dad's apartment, and they give you kind of a disembodied voice, but you can make it. I've got it so anywhere he goes in his apartment, he can be talking to Alexa, and but they're very inexpensive devices. You just can plug into a bathroom or wherever. They normally sell for $25, and the lowest price they've been seen at is around $10. So that might be the Prime Day price. Kindle Paperwhite, waterproof, normally selling for $130. CNET is saying that might be closer to $85 on Prime Day. The Echo Auto, which usually sells for $49. I've got one of those in the car. It's pretty handy. You can just ask Alexa to play the Morning Journal or whatever you want as you travel along. That Prime Day price might fall as low as $36. And the Fire HD 8, that's kind of my favorite tablet at this point, normally selling for $90. The Prime Day price could easily fall to $55. I love Prime Day. I still have things that I bought on Prime Day that I remember because we go through all these deals and, that would be cool. I have this odd habit. I have one cigarette a week on Thursdays. So it's sort of a ritual, and I've checked it out with my doctors, and it's just kind of a weekly pleasure that I look forward to. I found this really cool lighter, which is a windproof lighter. You charge it with a USB cable, so I can be having my Dunhill cigarette out on the beach in Maine or in Florida, and I have this lighter, and I can always light it. And whenever I use it once a week, so it doesn't get much use. And I always think, I remember I picked that up on Prime Day. And so the genius of Prime Day for me is similar to the retail genius of the treasure truck, making buying and shopping fun. And I look forward to it. I was interested to see if there's any changes this year as a result of the pandemic. And I'll be looking forward to letting you know what the date is as soon as we hear it. You won't be able to hide from that date once it's put out there. A couple of tech tips. First one is the app, which is put out by the DPLA as part of this library program. It's called SimplyE, and it's got on the Apple App Store, it's got 4.4 stars out of 5, 2009-04 ratings. I downloaded it on my iPhone, and it's a nice, clean app. It says that it can link you with specific libraries. I couldn't find Denver, Boston, or Cambridge on the list of libraries. There are quite a few there, but you can also get a DPLA list, mainly of public domain books, but it's a pretty robust selection. I read about an obscure science fiction writer in the new issue of Wired, Raphael Alocias Lafferty. I guess that's a science fiction writer that other science fiction writers really admire, but he hasn't not a huge following in the general public. Well, I was able to find 2 collections of short stories by Mr. Lafferty in the DPLA part of the content that you could access through the SimplyE app. The SimplyE app does not work, as I said, for Nook, Kindle Fire, or Kobo, but it is available for iOS and Android. Now, one of the things about this app, and I guess part of the whole infrastructure of this exchange that DPLA has, is that books are automatically returned at the end of the lending periods, so there's no fines. They just sort of disappear. For reading a book, I didn't see a way to make highlights. I could look up definitions. I thought I saw something that I could highlight a passage and then share it with somebody, but I couldn't actually make it work. If you're used to the full array of tools that we just take for granted in the Kindle interface. I mean, translations and looking things up, and the ease of highlighting and the smaller images of the pages so that you can kind of see where you are in the book. There's none of that, but for a simple read of a library book, this app does make that possible. The other thing I'll mention, I don't think I've talked about this with you, except maybe on the Morning Journal. The Echo Show 10 fourth generation. This is the $250 big new Echo 10, which swivels. I bought one of those for Dad for Christmas, and so I brought it out there a week or so ago, and he loves it. It follows his voice around, and the sound is better, the screen is better. And I noticed recently when I was doing a video chat with him, he sits in this chair. We call it the dog chair because it's got carved heads of dogs on the arms. The camera would kind of zoom in on him, and it would, if he shifted slightly, it would shift. So it was almost creating the effect of somebody was filming him in a professional way, and he wasn't just sitting there talking to a static box. And I really like it better than sometimes if Alexa isn't working, he'll do FaceTime. So he's holding his phone, and it's just not as good an interface, I think. But when I saw the new Echo Show actually focusing on him in a professional way, I thought, boy, this is even cooler than I thought it would. And every little thing which removes friction or adds to it, it brings him closer. Now, luckily I can be there with him now, and I don't have to wear a mask, and it's fantastic. But a lot of the time, we're connecting virtually. And with the improvement in this $250 Echo Show 10, it's just brought him a little closer, and I'm really grateful for that. Time now for the interview. I first spoke with science-based thriller author A.G. Riddle about the pandemic more than a year ago, just before Darlene and I decided to leave Denver for New England. And in that conversation, Jerry confirmed my sense that air travel might soon be limited, and I didn't want to get trapped 2,000 miles away from family members here, including my dad, who had just turned 93 on February 18th. Since then, Jerry has been a regular source of perspective and science about the pandemic, and as we enter the sometimes confusing transition to more normal life, I thought it would be a good time to talk with him again. I reached Jerry Riddle by Zoom at his home outside Raleigh, North Carolina on Tuesday, May 18th. Here is our conversation. I'll start by saying when we first talked, we were back in Denver. This would have been late February of 2020. And you just calmly said, well, there'll be a vaccine developed. And at that point, this will run its course. And that was so far ahead of my understanding of how this all would play out. And now when I've had the vaccine and I'm there, I think, God, Jerry saw this like a year before it came. So I want to know what you see a year from now, and then maybe work back into the confusion of the current sort of shifting of gears here, the unmasking and everything. But with that, you can start anywhere. What do you think it's important to know?
That's a great question. I mean, looking back on it, when we talked February of 2020, I mean, to me, the biological course of the pandemic was pretty clear, what was going to happen, the broad arc of events. I mean, it wasn't clear the exact dates. But what I sort of underestimated is the sociological impact and how people would react. I mean, it's sort of like the science becomes the easy part, right? And I'll have to admit, I was a bit naive about, how the world would react. I mean, I sort of saw it as just another natural disaster. I mean, in a hurricane situation, we live in North Carolina, and obviously we have some coastline here, and you always have people that refuse to evacuate. And then there are people that are the first ones out the door, when something's spotted. And I think, to a certain degree, the human population is sort of like that. I mean, it's a scary, unknown thing, and a lot of people were super cautious, and some people would just refused, no matter what you tell them, to alter their behavior. And so now the question becomes, well, what is the real impact, lasting impact on our society of this pandemic? And I just don't know. Like, if you had asked that question in 2020, I would have said, well, I think we're probably going to become more aware of the threat of pandemics on our society, and we're going to develop more early warning systems and more well-developed systems for dealing with this. It doesn't really feel like that's happening. It feels like there's maybe perhaps more skepticism of pandemics, and maybe people are more entrenched in their beliefs of how to handle one. And I think that there's something very dangerous about that, because every pathogen is different, right? Like every hurricane, in a sense, is sort of the same. It just depends on how hard is the wind blowing, how high is the storm surge. But pandemics are very different. I mean, the way they affect the host and, how quickly they're transmitted. So I think, to me, the big questions are what happens with the next one, right? And the thing that really scares me is that because this particular pathogen it was very lethal in terms of the total body count, but in terms of the percentage, I mean, it infected an incredible amount of people. And, if you had something, with this sort of mortality rate of any of the Ebola strains, Zaire, for example, is upwards of 90%, right? Then you're looking at something that really changes the world. So that's what I worry about. And the other thing I think about is, you look at the changes in society of people moving to the suburbs and, work from home, and, how sustainable is that on the economy, and what's that going to bring? I don't know. I mean, it's going to be an interesting year after that. I mean, there's going to be lingering effects for a long time, I think.
What was the mortality rate for COVID if you compare with a 90% rate for Ebola?
Good question. It's less than 1%. I mean, so you're talking about something that is, 100th or, or less, right? I mean, I think the mortality rate for COVID, I want to say, is maybe 2 or 3 times what the seasonal flu is, maybe 4 or 5 times, something like that.
How about the 1918 influenza? Was that comparable to COVID in terms of mortality, or
maybe much higher?
Much higher.
Yeah. It was, gosh, I knew these numbers because I included in a book about 10 years ago. But, yeah, you're looking at something far more deadly.
Yeah.
But, back then, virus couldn't travel like it can now.
Oh, right. Well, every pathogen is different. And what are some of the other parameters? You've got how easily it can be spread. You've got how lethal is it if you get it. Are there other ways in which the next pathogen could just be a completely different entity?
One of the things I think about is what are called reservoir hosts. And so these, for any zoonotic disease, so for example, Ebola is African fruit bats are reservoir hosts. So they have Ebola, but they don't get sick from it. And, so you have people that do cave diving in Sudan or Uganda, and they get sick, and, it looks like gastrointestinal distress, and then you figure out, man, this person has Ebola, and then it's everywhere, right? But Ebola is not very readily transmitted. It's not an airborne disease. So those are, what is your mode of transmission, right? Like, is it airborne? Is it fomites? Is it, surviving water droplets? And obviously most viruses, or all viruses would, but so that's your thing is, that's the thing that I think about. A really, really hard to contain virus would be one that would, say, survive in rats or mice or something like that, because once it gets in those populations, so this was the case for bubonic plague, actually survived in fleas that were on rats. So when they talk about, the rats being infected and being thrown on these barges in the Middle Ages, it was actually the fleas that were on the rats that carried, the plague and spread it so wide. And that was actually a bacteria. But so those are the things you think about, is how do you eradicate, once you get a really bad pathogen in a population, how do you get rid of it? I mean, so polio is probably the thing we've had the most success with. And I don't know that there are really many reservoir hosts for polio. It's like once you eradicated it in human beings, it's pretty much gone, right? It had nowhere to survive. But a pathogen, if they can get into some animal and survive for a while, they can come back. But I think, one of the things that I think is the big positive out of this COVID experience is vaccine development. I mean, these RNA vaccines that they developed in a short order, I think these biotech companies that were able to do that now, now there's just a cottage industry that's really keyed into, hey, it's a good thing for the human race, and it's a good business opportunity. And so when the next one comes out, I think you're going to see more rapid vaccine development. And I hope that's the case for variants and whatever we see.
Are there reservoir hosts for COVID other than humans?
I've never heard that, what it was. And usually a coronavirus does just exist in humans as far as I know, but I assume other primates could get it. But we don't have, at least in North America, there's no real primate interaction, so it's not a concern.
The vaccine development, especially in the U.S., I mean, there are plenty of people critical for the fact that in the U.S. we didn't lock down as seriously as some other places, but the vaccine rollout has been kind of the best in the world. But there's huge numbers in India, and there's places where the vaccine isn't being rolled out. Does that somehow come back to affect a place like the U.S., that even though we've done a great job with vaccine rollout, with variants or other aspects of a continuing big problem elsewhere in the world, how does that end up affecting us?
Yeah, the thing I worry about with that, I mean, it affects us a lot because it's sort of like you can't really just look at your country as an isolated island. I mean, even isolated islands like Australia and New Zealand have to sort of deal with, I mean, you're constantly getting biological influx. The thing that I worry about with India is you have, it's such a large population in a relatively small geographic space in which, if you have an outbreak like that, you get a lot of viral vectors where the virus is mutating, trying to infect more hosts, trying to stay alive in the host. With any given population, some percentage of hosts are just going to fight off the virus and just, kill it with no problem with relative ease. And then the virus is doing what it's trying to do, which is every time it copies itself, it'll try to make a better version via mutation. And so what you worry about with that much biological mass infected and that much virus is like them, just sort of this genetic lottery effect of at some point there's going to be some super virus coming out of it. And if it doesn't get contained in India and gets loose, but it's not a great situation there all the way around,
There's certainly an incentive for us to be as generous as possible with the vaccine worldwide until it's under control worldwide.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, when you come back down to sort of the current time frame where I see that air travel is approaching the levels of before the pandemic, and we're taking our masks off. I mean, it's only been the last 3 days when I've been out on a bike ride or a walk here in Cambridge where I felt okay to not wear the mask. Well, let's talk about air travel. Have you got a flight planned soon? And what's your personal risk assessment of going to the airport now? And you've had both of the vaccines, I assume.
Yeah, I've had both doses. My situation is a little different because my wife is 7 months pregnant.
Oh.
She has not taken the vaccine just because we haven't seen enough data on it. And
Sure.
Our lifestyle, she doesn't work outside the home, so she's not terribly exposed. And with this stuff, we balance risk versus reward. But
of course.
With that being said, the thing that I think about is I'm a 41-year-old relatively healthy individual and feel, I have the vaccine. I personally would travel if I needed to for work or for leisure. But the idea that I might get the virus and, I'd still probably fight it off, but bring it back home where she's unvaccinated presents a risk factor for me personally that would preclude any sort of air travel. But I have, like just earlier this week, I was on a writing retreat to try to finish up a new novel. And I drove to Asheville, North Carolina. And then I'm driving to Nashville in a few weeks to meet up with some authors. And so I really think it comes down to your personal risk tolerance in your situation, right? And it's sort of hard if I was the CDC person giving these national mandates, I frankly would be very nervous doing it, because I think, I don't know. I mean, I think if you're vaccinated, but you live with someone who's, a liver 1 month post liver transplant, I would personally still wear the mask, and stuff like that. So I think it's sort of a case by case basis. And I think if you're claustrophobic and the mask causes you a lot of psychological distress, I think that's a factor too.
What about restaurants? Probably the same. There would be individual differences, but if you've been vaccinated, you're in good health. Is it safe to go in a restaurant if they let you? I mean, some restaurants aren't letting people in yet, or if you do, you have to have a mask except when you're eating.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm actually not really sure. I mean, I think it depends on, frankly, I think it depends on where it is and what the local population is doing. If you're talking about a restaurant, you look at these maps of North Carolina, and sometimes there are counties that have just out of control breakthrough bunch of cases. And so if you're driving through and you stop at a local diner there where no one's wearing a mask and half these people's family's sick, that's pretty dangerous. But if you're talking about a high-end restaurant in Cambridge where people are taking a lot of precautions, that's not something I personally would worry about. But yeah.
My grandson is 15, and I don't know if it was just Massachusetts or nationally, but now he's in the age group that can get the vaccine. So hopefully by the end of the summer, he'll have it. What do you see in the fall as the school year starts up again?
Hopefully we're getting back to normal. I mean, my perspective on that is a lot like adults. It's, if this is a young person that has some health issues, I think getting the vaccine presents a lot more benefits than risk. And, these vaccines are new. I mean, we do need to gather longitudinal data to figure out exactly. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. You can't really say. All you can do is handicap the odds. But my hope is that these young people get to go back to, either high school or college. I mean, there is something I think we're all learning about being in person that is really valuable, and especially for college, I think.
Oh, yeah.
So hopefully that'll be the case.
It just scares me to death when I hear people talk about the next pandemic, and it's really just a matter of when. And when you think of the sociological aspects that you mentioned, that this was really hard to predict how we would react to it. The normal expectation that I would have going into it is, okay, we saw that this was real. It was incredibly disruptive. A staggering number of people died. If word came down next year that there was another coronavirus or some other pathogen, and the credible people were saying, yes, this is real, I would expect people to say, well, by God, we're going to get it right this time. We're not going to drag our feet and listen to people that are mocking it. But I think it's possible it just would be the same camps warring for, the response that what we've been through, you would hope would inoculate us and prepare us for a better reaction to something that might be far more dangerous. But I'm not sure I'm hopeful that would be the case.
Yeah, I do think that is frankly, the big risk is, as human beings, we are, pattern matching organisms. Like if we see something that looks like something we already know and have experienced before, we have a natural inclination to judge it the same way, or, expects to some degree the same outcomes. And with viruses, it's radically different. I mean, if you say this is another coronavirus variant, then yeah, it's a respiratory disease and you can kind of figure out, but 1 or 2% on the mortality scale can radically alter the effects of, what you're dealing with. So yeah, I mean, that's the concern for sure. And I think people now, I think, the economic effects of this was very substantial and can't be discounted, I don't think. And so people, I think, especially business owners, the next time around will be, I think, at least I think they're going to be inclined to say, look, I have to preserve my business, especially if it happens soon after their business is still not on firm footing, So that I think is a pretty big risk.
It seems like one of the toughest things to manage was the fact that it could be transmitted by people who weren't showing symptoms. I mean, I think with Ebola and some of the others, by the time somebody was really, really sick, you knew they had it. There wasn't a period before they got really sick that it was questionable. But is that always going to be the case with coronaviruses, or any other pathogens have that similar ability to spread before you even know who's spreading it?
Respiratory viruses are notorious for asymptomatic transmission. And so it's like, Ebola is a viral hemorrhagic fever. And so, your tissues are hemorrhaging out blood, and, it does, I think it gets in saliva and some other bodily fluids, but you've really got to transmit those fluids. And so it's a lot harder to transmit. And so respiratory viruses just in general are the toughest thing to contain. And that they generally will have some degree of asymptomatic transmission. It just depends on the virus and how much they can, amplify before the host really is impacted. I mean, and even with corona, I mean, you saw people, I talked to someone who got an antibody test and didn't even know that they had the coronavirus, and they, had the antibodies for it. Right. And so there's some people that never become symptomatic and are obviously likely transmitting the virus if they have some viral load in their body. But yeah, that's a real concern. I mean, the worst virus in the world that you could conceive of would be one that could be transmitted for, weeks and then is very deadly. Right? Yeah. That's
look out. Yeah. Huh. That sounds like something somebody might write a novel about.
I don't know what sort of person would do that,
but well, you mentioned in passing that you're working on a new novel. Can you say anything about it yet, or what have you been working on with all this time that you've got that you can be delightfully isolated?
Yeah, I've actually completed 2 novels, and I've got a little bit of another one, but I think the publisher, the audiobook and the UK publisher, want to do a big thing about it. So I can't say I'm under wraps on my own.
Sure.
Yeah. Hopefully
within the next month or so, or when should we look?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good, I mean, we're negotiating on release dates. I'd love for it to come out this year, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you got any TV or Hollywood stuff happening attached to any of your other novels, or?
Yeah, a lot of people circling. I mean, I was telling my wife the other day, I'm always a bridesmaid, never a bride on the TV stuff. It's like, I've been down the aisle a few times, but never seems to happen. But I don't know. I mean, my thought is it'll probably happen after I pass away and my wife can enjoy all the royalties. In fact, like there's so many people whose movie gets made after they, kick the bucket.
The grandkids are going to. I talked with C.J. Box, who writes mystery westerns set in Wyoming, and he's had. I think now there's one series that's out based on his books, and there's another one coming based on the game warden. And it was interesting to see how separate an event that was from the books that he wrote that created it. He said he's just sort of creating a platform for somebody else to do something with the character. And it struck me as a really interesting thing that could happen to a writer to all of a sudden have the work presented in a completely different genre.
Yeah, and different authors have different perspective on it. I also think it depends. Like if you have one series that you've written and that's your body of work, I think you're probably pretty protective and very particular about how it's presented. Like my agent, I had the same agent as Deanna Gabaldon, who wrote the Outlander series, and obviously she's been writing these very long novels, and she's very involved in the TV stuff. I think 9 books and 2 trilogies and a duology. And my perspective is I'd love to just see something made. And so I have my literary agent, I've got the film and TV agent. And I always tell the guy, I was like, what, I'm going to leave this in your hands. Let's try to find the right people. And if it doesn't work out, we'll live to fight another day. And it's sort of like I'm early in my career, so I don't have maybe as much say as someone like Stephen King, who could say, these are the things you can't touch, or,
you get to pick the actors or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm not quite there yet. I do get to pick the narrators for my audiobook, but that's about as much pull as I have. But
yeah. Has your publishing business changed much? Mix of self-publishing. I think maybe you were working with other publishers overseas. What's happened in the last year or two, just in the way you're? Did you get a business manager you've hired, or I think your wife was maybe helping you out? What's new in the business side of it?
Yeah, I mean, it continues to evolve. I mean, traditionally published outside the U.S. and then I'm traditionally published in audio. There's an audiobook publisher, and then in the United States we self-publish. United States and Canada we self-publish the ebooks, and then we print. We like this new novel will get probably a first printing of about 50,000 trade paperbacks and maybe 5,000 or 10,000 hardcovers. And the big thing that's happened is that my dad, he owned this warehouse where we stored all these. Well, we have 80,000 print books right now from the old titles. So he sold this warehouse. So now I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with all these, paperbacks. And my wife, I mean, our household has become so busy. She doesn't work on the book business very much. And so now I am trying to sort out, should I hire someone to manage this stuff? But I've never been the reason I became a writer is I'm not a very good manager of people. So I don't particularly want to have someone else to manage. So. Yeah.
You loop back and next thing you know, you're like when you were running an internet corporation.
That's right. There's a reason I got out of that business, right? But, I'm coming full circle a little bit, but I mean, the writing the books is what I really enjoy and what I'm trying to spend more time on. And so that's what I've been thinking about is how can I spend more time doing the stuff that I think I'm good at and that I enjoy. But it's becoming harder. I mean, the pandemic in a strange way has been good for book sales. I mean, people have really wanted to read this more sort of science fiction, fantasy stuff that I write. And unfortunately for the bookstore owners and the people who work there, those have been closed. And so they have driven them to digital formats and online where we're much more present and have a bit of a competitive advantage. But I think, some of that will certainly reverse. But I also think some of the behavior from consumers and readers has changed.
In what way?
I think people, who maybe wouldn't have tried ebooks or wouldn't have tried buying their books online have done it. And I think they basically say, well, that's something that's convenient. I'm going to stick with that. Mm-hmm. Audio has been surprisingly strong. I mean, we thought with people not commuting that the audio would go down, but for whatever reason, audio has been fairly robust and continues to grow.
That's interesting to me because I've always, I don't have a commute anymore. So the only time I can listen to audiobooks and podcasts is when I'm doing the dishes or a few things or maybe going on a walk. But when you think of the huge difference in the number of people commuting, I guess that just shows people really enjoy hearing a story that way. And it's not just killing time when they're on an LA freeway.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's true. And I also think people are looking for that escape of, someone telling them a story, and maybe if they're working from home, they're looking at screens all the time and they like, the audio or whatever.
There's something about the voice. It's, I've been playing around with that, Clubhouse, the social app that's all audio. And I think it's sort of peaked. I was, as usual, a huge cheerleader for it. How it was going to change the world. Well, I don't think so much now, but it's still some interesting things happen there. And I've had some people who listen to the show, and I've talked with by email a lot, and all of a sudden I have a chance to hear their voice in these Clubhouse rooms, and oh wow, I've been talking to him for 10 years, but I've never heard his voice. And there's so much information in the voice. You don't get to see these people. It's not a video thing. You're just hearing them, and their little circles show up. So I think that for me, that Clubhouse experience has perhaps explained the popularity of audiobooks, because it's great to read a story, but when you hear one, there's really something extra.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
How do you choose a narrator? Do you listen to the voice and try to forget the words so that you can hear what that channel is going to do for your story, or how do you know?
I typically look at what they've done in my genre and how they've sort of performed on similar books. And then for myself, I try to get I, in my head, have sort of this idea of what the character feels like. And it's hard to explain, but then if they have done a voice and their voice sort of feels natural to the sort of the main POV character, then I think it's pretty easy. So for like Winterworld, the Long Winter trilogy, we, as a alternating narrator, so we had a male and a female narrator. And so we went through and found talent that I felt like really sort of, reflected who these characters were, like the tone of their voice that they had done with other characters. And then I think to a certain extent, some of the narrator selection is a business decision. Like if you look, some of these narrators have such a huge following.
Oh, sure.
They can, a series that may not have sold as many copies, they can lift it to a completely different level. I mean, there are some of my peers sell far more in audio than they do in print or ebook, and that's like 80% of their income. And some of that is selecting the right narrator who really has that people will listen to anything that person narrates, even if it's an author they don't know or a book that they wouldn't have otherwise read. So
do some of those real stars that bring audiences with them, can they switch from romance to science fiction and the people will still follow them?
Yeah. And a lot of them sort of, I don't know if it's typecast or if they just have a preference, but they do tend to stick to their genre.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And it's sort of like they're probably what they're earning for. So science fiction is really big in audio. And so R.C. Bray is the guy who narrated The Martian, and that was a big hit. And then after that, I mean, you would hear authors talking about what it costs per hour. I mean, it's crazy.
Wow.
And so I think, but for science fiction novels, he was well worth it. And it still is.
You hear people casting for a part in a movie and, it's hundreds or thousands of screen tests until they finally find the person. But do you just go through a handful of possibilities, or are you listening to 50 or 100 voices before you hear what you want?
So the process in the last 3 books is the audiobook publisher will suggest like 5 or 6 people that they have an existing relationship, maybe even, I don't know how the contracts work with a narrator. And so they'll send me those folks, and I'll listen to other books they've done. And I think we could probably get them to read if we weren't finding what we wanted. And in a few cases, I was like, these folks are pretty good, but they're not quite what we're looking for. And then they would send me another, list of people and listen to it.
Your wife's due in a couple of months now, or?
That's right. Yeah, she's due in about 2.5 months. Yeah.
And now, how many kids do you have already?
1. So this will be our second, and my wife informs me final child.
I see. That's good.
It's a negotiation to get to 2. But,
yeah. Well, that's a good number. And are you in the new house? For a while you were getting ready to move, and
we are. Yes, we moved at the end of last year, and there's still about 12 people here every day working on the house. So there's still some work going on, and my wife has subsequently informed me that this work needs to conclude in about 3 weeks.
I see.
Delivery of this child number 2. So
no, she has some biological imperatives about having the nest be free of workmen, I'm sure. So
this is correct. And of noise and distraction.
Oh, yeah. We had quite a remodeling project here, the house in Cambridge. It went on for a year. And there was a period where I just thought those guys would never leave, that the rest of my life I would have. And then there's a few final projects and this and that. And I have this sensation of, in fact, it happened this morning. I was sitting here in my chair. My den is so nice and the house is just perfect. I think there haven't been any workmen here in like 9 months. I'm like, when did they leave? When did I go from that kind of hell to actually living in my house? It's ugh.
Yeah. Our dog knows the people who work here. I mean, it just expects them to be here every day. So I don't know if it's going to be heartbroken when it ends.
Well, that's good. Well, anything else you want to mention that's on your mind? You've got a pretty full plate going forward, it sounds like.
It's a busy year. No, nothing from my end. I love catching up with you. And it's good to see you. Yeah. Back in Cambridge and back at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the plan is to, I don't know, we sort of scared ourselves driving from Florida here. I still hope that we're going to be able to drive at least one more time down. So, and
come by and see us.
That would be fun. I'd really enjoy that. It felt sad to just be whizzing through North Carolina and not having a chance to see you there, but great. Well, thanks, Jerry. Take care. Good luck with everything.
Yeah.
Talk soon.
Yeah. Good to talk to you.
I've really come to enjoy hearing Jerry Riddle's calm, thoughtful voice in our conversations during the pandemic. And I'm glad to hear he has finished 2 new novels, because that will give me another chance to have him on the show and to read his latest stories. I've admired how his love of science is woven into his fiction, and that the result of that is that I've always learned important things while reading his books, as well as enjoying the terrifically paced stories with characters that I care about. As a reminder, his trilogy is titled The Long Winter. It's made up of Winter World, The Solar War, and The Lost Colony. His 2-part series, The Extinction Files, is made up of Pandemic and Genome. His first trilogy, The Origin Mystery, comprises the Atlantis Gene, the Atlantis Plague, and the Atlantis World, and he's also written and published a standalone novel titled Departure. Highly recommended, and I can't wait to see what he releases next. That's it for this week. My guest next week will be Paul Rudnick, who has written a book titled Playing the Palace, and I've talked about this in the Morning Journal. This is the first book I don't think I can ever remember in 37 years of marriage, and even in the dating days, reading an entire book to Darlene. But I told her, I thought, boy, I'm reading a funny book about this gay guy that falls in love with the Prince of Wales, the heir to the throne, who's also openly gay, and all kinds of drama ensues. Also kind of a touching love story. And I started reading it to her, and she just kept saying, can we read some more of the book? And we finally finished it last night. It's going to be released on Tuesday, and that's the day that I'll be speaking with Paul Rudnick about the book. He's a successful playwright. He's had plays on Broadway, off-Broadway, and done a lot of other creative stuff. It turns out he was born the same year as Darlene, 1957, so he's a contemporary in that regard. And I've asked Darlene if she'll help me do the interview, because since we experienced the book in such a kind of an intimate way together, I think it'd be fun just to have her ask him a question, or at least be there. So far, I'm not getting very far on that plan, and I'm not going to push it. But any event, I'm looking forward to talking with him, and the book is available for pre-order, $9.99 on Kindle, and I'll be talking to him next week. As usual, I will set up a room at Clubhouse Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time to talk about the show, the interview with Jerry Riddle, anything else that's on your mind. These have turned out to be very nice salons. There were 3 of us there last week, and we had a great conversation, and I was very interested to get feedback on the Brad Stone interview, which, I put a lot of thought into what approach I was going to take to the book, and was really glad to hear Al and Chris talk about their impressions of it. So I hope you'll join us if you haven't come before, and there'll be a link in the show notes that gets you into Clubhouse. It's a lot easier to get into Clubhouse these days, because I think its moment has kind of passed, but it's still a nice platform for getting together with Kindle Chronicles listeners each week after the show. It's sort of the after the pod discussion, and it's nice to have it on Monday afternoon so people have a chance to listen to the show. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I really appreciate your taking the time to stop by and listen. Have a good week. Bye.